With that, welcome everyone to the July Franklin School Board meeting, and I'll call this meeting to order. First item that we'll have is open up for public comments. Any comments on the agenda for this evening?
Mr. Lamb, I might remind everyone that the reentry plan discussion is on here. So if there are questions specific about reentry and going back to school, if parents could ask now, or feel free to use the chat bar, and then we will moderate that and make sure that we get all of your questions answered.
Dr. Clendenning, I'm worried about cub care at Custer Baker. You know,
Okay.
We have tables, we do not have desks. And I just wonder, are we going to get desks or what's
Yeah,
going
as far, yeah. Sandy, thanks. Those are two good questions. One about just what's it going to look like, and then facilities for you, and as far as desks. Let me look into that. We should be able to get you a desk for sure that would have that plexiglass around. I know Mrs. Betts.
No, I know that, but I'm talking about our kiddos.
Oh yeah, the kiddos. Mrs. Betts just jumped in. You know, the one thing we're going to try to do is get them outside as much as possible.
Right, of course.
Yeah, and then on the inside, I think we are still looking at possibilities. I know Mrs. Betts, the gymnasium is still where we're planning to go. Is that correct for most of the spots at Creekside?
Depending on what rooms we have available to us, yes, we are looking to spread the kiddos out as much as possible. Sandy, like Dr. Clendenning said, we want to spend a lot of time outside.
Right.
We're also looking at ways for our site leaders to take attendance in a way that's not so close together. So Dr. Clendenning and myself and Mr. Sewell and his whole operations team are kind of reevaluating exactly what cup care looks like. And then we'll get that information out to our site leaders and our workers, and then also our parents. So that's a great question.
Yeah, well, I don't worry about as much, at Custer Baker, maybe 2025.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty easy to, but Creekside, woo!
Yeah, and we may look to hire some more people just so we can spread out even more. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You wouldn't put the fourth graders to Custer Baker, would you?
No, we really want to keep people at their home buildings as much as possible. We're working with transportation on transporting across buildings. At this point, I wouldn't say everything is out, but we really are trying to keep people in their own home buildings.
Okay, that's what I needed to know.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I saw one
Andy,
pop
there
up
was-
in the chat bar.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm trying to open it. Ms. Ott wanted to know, Amanda Ott says, will there be contact tracing? If a teacher tests positive for COVID, are they required to quarantine for 2 to 3 weeks? And is their sick leave covered, paid? I'll let you get to that first. And then we'll kind of go down the list if that's okay.
Contact tracing. Yes, it's my understanding that it's going to be the state's responsibility for contact tracing. And they will be the ones that would notify both the teacher and anyone in the classroom if they would be inside that. We are going to also have people that were going to help us as far as helping share information. We won't be able to give that out, but Amanda, regarding a teacher, yes, if they come down with COVID, it's my understanding that they are going to have to be out for 14 days and 72 hours free of a fever without Tylenol or other something to break that fever. So that way it could be longer than that. So we'll definitely make sure that we're sharing what we can, but we're continuing to work with Johnson County Health Department, and the state has hired several hundred contract tracers during this COVID-19 era, and it's really their job once the tests get back. I will tell you, in talking to Dr. Mormon, the Johnson County just received a grant to further testing abilities, and that will be available starting September the 1st, where they're going to have a lot more testing available, because he knows right now that we have to get quicker turnaround by the time you get tested and the results back. So that's what we are trying to really strive to connecting and get with.
And did you mention whether or not that time would be paid, or would they use sick leave, or how would that work for teachers?
The federal law, and actually we have COVID-19 policies coming up later tonight, but federal law actually covers them. The first 2 weeks are covered if they have that sick leave, and then they can also get Family Medical Leave Act. And then there's some also additional things if it's their family member with regard to COVID-19 as well. So yes, the federal government has really stepped up and helped with the Family Medical Leave Act, and we are concurring and following that as well. And they would be able to use their sick time.
Okay. She also asked, if a student in her child's class tests positive, do the other students and teachers they've been around have to go into quarantine? And I know you mentioned HIPAA, and Amanda mentions it here as well. Do we all get notified who's infected and when? Or because of HIPAA regulations, are parents and teachers going to get may have been in contact emails all year long?
It's my understanding that regarding HIPAA, the state's stepping up to take that responsibility. Will we be quarantined? That will be a conversation with Dr. Mormon, who will provide us the guidance with that. I will tell you the CDC guidelines are anyone that's been inside that person's bubble for more than 15 minutes would then fall into that category of being isolated, quarantined, to move forward. And as far as we know, they're going to streamline that communication to us so that we can get that to everybody as soon as possible.
If a teacher, if a teacher is diagnosed with COVID, how does it work with all of the students that they would have come into contact with? Are they automatically in quarantine? Do they have to be tested before they can return? What are the logistics of that?
Yeah, we would then go back to that contact tracing, relying on that. How often were they inside that 6 foot bubble for more than 15 minutes? Obviously, the class would probably have a big exposure opportunity at that time, but we don't have a set answer on what and how that would play out until we get for the medical authorities.
Okay. Mackenzie Newby asks, are there certain symptoms that will be overlooked? What symptoms will be a for sure send home to quarantine?
We're going to ask all parents to help us do that pre-check before school every day, and we're going to use the CDC guidelines on that available symptoms. For the school, we are going to go, continue to say, if you've got a fever of 100, you got to be out for that 72-hour period with regard to being fever-free. And any other signs and symptoms, we're going to rely on your family doctor. The school is going to have to rely on parents and doctors. That's why we're doing away with things like perfect attendance for students. We're going to have more grace in that 7-day period. In the past, we've had that letter go home and say, hey, you've exceeded your 7 days. Please work with the school. All those things are going to play into us providing more grace for that.
Okay, it looks like there's one more question. Amanda asks, where's the district going to find a substitute teacher who will work in a classroom full of exposed, possibly infected students for substitute pay? They also teach in multiple schools, so what if they are diagnosed? Well, you kind of mentioned how we would go about that. We would use that contact tracing. But on the first part, the level of how we're finding subs.
Yeah, so that, Amanda, you are right about subs. We had that conversation just briefly today. We've been talking about it often. That would obviously be something we'll have to consider. One of the things we're not going to do is be pulling multiple classrooms together to bring kids into that teaching. We just won't be able to do that. We'll have to figure out on how we're using administrators and trying to get subs. We are hiring 23 CARES Act assistants. And one of the things that they're going to be doing is filling in that substitute role. and making sure that we're able to do that. We know, and we concur, Amanda, on the sub issue. We're continuing to look at that as one of those barriers that we have to have an answer for, and we'll continue to work to do that.
Michael Sponsberg asks, what is and when will the contingency plan be ready? Is there a percentage or a magic number that we're looking at to move to at-home learning for the entire district?
We are following our policy. So right now it'll be that 20% threshold in the building. I would say that as we've talked now and we've looked forward to what may happen, we're going to look at individual buildings and the district as we travel forward. We'll be in contact with Johnson County Health Department, but it is possible that we would have a building or a classroom not come because of COVID-19 and the rest of the school go to school. But that's a conversation that we're going to have with Dr. Moorman and Betsy Swearingen with regard to what's safe and best for everybody. Regarding contingency plans, we are continuing throughout this journey to look at contingency plans. As we've said all along, our reentry plans are what we know right now with the knowledge that we have right now, and they're intended to give parents the best knowledge to make that decision for your family. But as information continues to come up and be made available to us, we are ready to respond to that, and we will respond to that. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that inside of our reentry plans, but we are continuing every day to have conversations at both the building and district level about what happens if. So I think that's a really good question.
Mackenzie Newby also asks, what are the plans for winter as we plan on being outdoors as much as possible? How does that work with the cold weather, inclement weather, things like that?
Right now, once we get to wintertime and we have to go inside, we're going to continue to look at, air circulation, continue to look at the mask policy that we have that says entering into the building in the hallways and when you can't have that 6-foot barrier. But we're also going to continue to monitor what data points we have with regard to both COVID and the flu and those things.
And it looks like right now the last question, also Mackenzie Newby says, if the schools are doing all of their meetings virtually, then how can you say it's safe for students to return? This sounds more like we are throwing them in the lion's den along with the adults that work at the schools and hope for the best.
Right now, we are still in summer vacation, in summer mode, and so most of the people are away. The principals are back, and it is a way for us to do our meetings. And we're going to continue to look at what's best for our district, and we're giving the parents that information so you can make the best decisions, both either virtual or in school.
All right, Mr. Lamb, it looks like that was the last question I had.
All right. Thanks, Robin, and thanks to all for those questions. Now I'll turn to the board and see if there's any comments from the board.
None for me.
All right. And we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, the consent agenda. Dr. Clendenning, any comments on the items that are listed here?
A couple things you are going to see on the personnel report. We're starting to hire some of the teachers that we need, as well as the assistants. And then Mrs. Gross has a change with regard to non-certified salary schedule. Ms. Gross, you want to comment about that?
We just had a couple of calculation errors in, I think it was SRO positions and I'm sorry, and extended ed assistants. So it was just a mathematical error, and Carissa in HR corrected those for this meeting.
Yeah. And the last one I would comment on is letter N, the adult and mental health agreement. This is a new state law that you have to have a third party mental health partner, and Adult and Child has been our partner for many years, and this agreement just continues that partnership, and it meets this new state law.
And thank you for that, As we talk about personnel reports, I received a letter from the Indiana Association of School Business Officials last week that Melissa Kiesel is now certified as a business office specialist. So she's completed 66 hours of instruction to get that certificate. So I'd like to say well done and thank you for that time commitment to that program.
I'll be sure to extend your congratulations to her. She's
Thank
worked
you.
hard for that. Thank you, Andy.
All right. Any other questions or comments on those items? All right. Do I hear a motion?
Move for approval.
Thank you, Brian. Brian, how do you vote? I don't see Clark there, so it's just yourself.
It's just me and I vote yes.
Thank you. Christy?
I vote yes.
Thank you. Becky?
Yes.
And I vote yes, so the motion passes. All right, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda is our superintendent reports. And the first item is the reentry plan update.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lamb. We're going to start with Dr. Warland. She has some information regarding the virtual world that is being considered. We have about 10% of our parents right now that are choosing that option. So Dr. Warland, please talk a little bit about our virtual offerings.
Yes, I want to first start with thanking everyone who participated in the survey that we submitted, I would say about 2 weeks ago. We had over 61% of you participate, over 3,100 students counted in those numbers. We needed that data in order to make some decisions. And so I want you to know how much we appreciate your ongoing questions, your ongoing participation. We are trying to pivot and respond as quickly as we can to this ever-changing environment. And without you, that's not possible. So thank you. We did send out, Mrs. Betts sent out some information this weekend to try to provide you with additional details about our virtual option. If you have questions, I'm happy to entertain those. A couple things I do want to cover is that on Wednesday, we will be sending out what's in essence an enrollment form, asking you to commit, I would say, as to what is best for your student come August 5th. It's important to note that we will have a grace period. So between August 5th and August 28th, you have time. If you make the decision that virtual is what's best for my student, or one or two of my students and the rest, it's best for them to go on site, you have time that month to determine whether that is still that best decision for you for the remainder of that semester, and vice versa. If you decide a building is where your student needs to be, and August 15th, you decide, you know what, this is not the best place, within that grace period, you can make that shift. We will then need to recalibrate where we are at the end of August. You can also make that shift at the end of the first semester prior to the beginning of the second semester if we are still in a state where the virus is necessitating this type of option. I think it's important to note that we are going to deliver the K through 6 curriculum that we have using Franklin Community Schools teachers. 7 through 12, we are using our Apex Learning online digital curriculum, managed by Franklin Community Schools teachers. At the K through 6 level, you will see a curriculum that looks very familiar with your everyday math, our new ELA curriculum. Some of those pieces should be familiar. I'm happy to entertain, is it appropriate at this time, Dr. Clendenning, to entertain questions if there are questions, or do you want to save that for later?
I'll look to Mr. Lamb. Would you like to entertain questions at this time for each section?
Absolutely. If we have any questions, let's go ahead, and this is an important topic.
We do have two, Brooke.
Okay.
Regarding virtual learning, students are taught band and choir in school, but have out-of-school activities. Will they still be able to participate virtually?
So currently, the way the virtual program is designed, that if you are in our virtual environment, you're not engaged in extracurricular activities. And we're trying to be consistent K through 12. In Apex, there are some options for electives, but all of those electives don't match up exactly with current schedules. So counselors will be reaching out to families who choose the virtual environment to try to find the best option for those students engaged in that environment.
And Carrie Lamphere wondered, what would a day of Apex learning look like for a high school student?
Great question. And I think it's important to note that Apex Learning is a digital system that we already have at Franklin Community Schools. We have some students who will take courses over the summer. We have some that will take at the high school, they'll take one course in Apex and their other courses are face-to-face. So Apex is designed as really you work at your own pace in many ways. We will schedule opportunities for office hours with our own teachers, times to answer questions. We will schedule time to do online assessments, but much of it is self-paced and self-guided. We're providing our instructional staff as a support network for those students because we will have some students, it will be a completely different learning environment. So we're trying to provide that support for them.
D Straight wondered, you know how you had a breakdown of K-6 virtual learning, 7-12 virtual learning. She wondered if they have a 6th grader and 7th grader, could they both do Apex?
If you have a 6th grader and a 7th grader, so if we have a 6th grader at CBIS, 5th grade will be taught by Mrs. Julie Hart. She's one of our current teachers in that building. 6th grade will work with Mrs. Angie Green. 7th grade for Apex, 7th grade and up will be for Apex due to some of the structure of that particular online system.
Okay. And then Dawn Eversole wondered, if we choose the virtual environment, how then do we adapt those children, or how do we help those children adapt to Custer Baker the following year?
Oh, great question. And I really like, these are great questions, everyone. So thank you. And I can tell you're really focused on being student-centered and where our kids are. I want all of you to know, we will address that in the coming year, and it may be the coming semester. But I know Cheryl very well. I know all of our principals, and they are going to ensure that we make that transition as easy as possible. To be honest, we're already giving thought to that as we think about our 6th graders moving up into 7th grade and how do we ensure they feel comfortable in the building? How do our 4th graders moving into 5th grade, how do we ensure they feel comfortable in the building, given that we're in a bit of a different situation this semester? So we will already have some of those processes in place.
Great. I think it's important to mention Director of Special Education, Jennifer Scott, noted in the comments, just a quick clarification for middle and high school students in Essential Skills and our TAC program. They will not access Apex. Their teacher of record will be the one providing that virtual instruction due to their specially designed curriculum for them. So good point, Jen.
Yes, thanks, Jen. And there is a note about if we need to make an adjustment to an IEP for the virtual environment, we will make that happen.
Jason Scott said, it's been announced that the federal government is still wanting iRead 3 to be given to last year's 3rd grade students. How will this will this happen in Franklin, and will it happen for those virtual students?
I know that there's conversation about both iRead for 3rd and 4th grader. No decision has been made at this point with regard to the State Department. Regarding virtual students, when we take assessments, they will have to take assessments just like our students, and we'll have to make those arrangements. That's why Mr. Sprout has worked so diligently to get our Chromebooks with the operating system and structure that allows that to take place. So we'll continue to work on what happens with iRead 3 with the State Department, but right now there's been no decision on that. So thanks.
And we did find out recently on the assessment side that we can do NWEA from a virtual setting. So there is some good news and movement in that front.
Brooke, could you maybe touch quickly on the grace period. Mackenzie Newby wondered if they choose virtual learning, but they're still unsure after 2 weeks that it's the right choice, especially since there will be a delay of online learning starting. Then what do we do? And I'm not sure about the delay, Brooke. You might want to touch on that also.
Well, we will all start school on August 5th. So whether you're in an online setting or a virtual setting, or if you're in the building. So everyone will start August 5th. The grace period lasts from August 5th to August 28th. By August 28th, we will ask everyone to commit so that we don't have students moving back and forth from an online environment to an in-class or a face-to-face environment, because that creates disruption and confusion for our students and our teachers, frankly, in both settings. It becomes very disruptive to the learning environment and to the learning of the student that's transitioning back and forth. Robin, do you think I tackled that question?
I do, but I will give Mackenzie a second to kind of think about that. While she is, D Straight wondered about the high ability. Does Apex curriculum coordinate with this for the 7th grade?
That's a great question, Dee. We actually had that conversation today because we've come up with some solutions for the K through 6 area. I need to keep looking at 7th and 8th grade. That's on my list.
Mackenzie's great. She said, thanks for clarifying.
Yes, you bet, Mackenzie. My apologies there.
Thank you, Dr. Worland. I'm going to turn to Mr. Sewell. He's going to talk a little bit about operations side of life, and that'll be with regard to food service, transportation, and custodial maintenance inside the building. So, Mr. Sewell.
Yes, last meeting we mentioned that we were on the transportation front. We were concerned about the capacity limitations in our buses with Dr. Mormon asking us to limit ourselves to 2 students per seat. And we initially thought we were going to be in front of you today offering a recommendation of walk zones to help us with that issue. And as we studied that question and looked at the impact of walk zones in our community, we decided that that wasn't a good solution. That just simply, there were just too many questions about whether we could provide safe crossings, and mobilizing that many crossing guards was going to be difficult on the time allotted. And it was really going to put the burden of getting students to school on some of the families in our community that rely the most on our busing services. So with that in mind, we've decided to withdraw that as a recommendation relative to our busing services. What we are seeing is that as we surveyed our communities, that many people are already planning to bring their students to school, and we believe we will be able to build bus routes that will get everyone to school on time. As a contingency, Mr. Dickinson is working on what is called a 2-tiered bus routing scheme that would have dedicated buses for every school. And to make that work, we would have to move the start time of the middle school and the high school back to almost 9 o'clock in the morning to provide enough time for the buses to make the trips to the elementary school and Custer Baker, and then turn around and run the routes for the middle school and the high school. Again, we are just looking at that as a contingency plan. We will be prepared to implement that if we find that we are not able to get students to school on time without losing instruction time. But wanted to make you aware and the community aware that that is something we've been looking at, and we did kind of change our thinking on how to best manage our transportation functions. I will let you know I met with a traffic engineer and a pavement marking company over the last few days, and I have made a number of improvements at the middle school and Northwood in particular to help us do a better job with the car rider line efficiency. So we realize and we recognize we're shifting more traffic to our car rider lines, and we are making provisions for that. On the food services front, Mrs. Overton and the building principals have been hard at work figuring out how to make that work. Obviously, our lunchtime is a time when potentially lots of students would be coming together. And to mitigate that, we have a variety of strategies to either serve meals in classrooms or in multiple areas of the building where we can space students more effectively. Mrs. Overton and her team will be preparing prepackaged meals. Those will still contain hot items to make sure we're still providing that high quality, well-balanced, compliant meal as always. But those will be prepackaged with disposable utensils and so on, so that those can either be delivered to a classroom or can be delivered kind of in a grab and go format that would, again, allow classroom groups and small groups to remain together and separate from other groups, and really kind of minimize the gatherings that our meal times cause in our buildings. The other thing Ms. Overton is working on is a meal reservation system and payment system that would make that process of making your meal selections more touchless and reducing the amount of money that needs to change hands, and just to keep both our staff and the students safe as we arrange for ordering and payments of meals. On the custodian front, we have the buildings are in good shape already, and we have a few more weeks where we will be continuing to focus on prepping the buildings and sanitizing the buildings ahead of welcoming our students back on August 5th. We are taking delivery this week on some sanitizing equipment and a sanitizing solution that's very safe for contact shortly after it's applied. It doesn't leave any kind of residue that will be harmful to anyone. And we will be training our staff on applying that sanitizing agent, and just really to increase our ability to sanitize areas and shared items such as PE equipment or weight rooms and so on quickly and efficiently as we do class changeovers and so on. So more work always going on that front as we prepare for increased emphasis in our cleaning and sanitizing, but our custodian team has been doing a great job with that, and we're feeling well prepared for that. I think those are the highlights. Was there anything else you'd like for me to cover, Dr. Clendenning?
No, thank you, Mr. Sewell. Appreciate that. So there was a question about a transportation survey. We did have a survey that was sent out about transportation. So if there's a specific question that you have, if you can contact either Mr. Sewell or any of us at Central Office, we'll make sure we get that to you. It really comes down to, we're trying to have as best a social distancing experience that we can on the bus. We know we have to get kids to and from school. They will be required to wear a mask to protect the driver as well as all their friends, and their friends are protecting them. And that is going to be something that will be with us until this pandemic is finished. And we just appreciate everybody's support on that with regard to masks and safety. Did you talk about the one-stop policy? I don't believe you mentioned that. You want to go ahead and talk just a little about that, because that is a significant change for Franklin schools.
Sure. We are among the measures we're taking on our buses is we're going to make sure the windows are down as much as possible, given the weather conditions, to make sure there's enhanced ventilation, and kids are going to sit in assigned seats. And then together, as Dr. Clendenning mentioned, with students and drivers wearing masks, we think those are all good measures to help us keep that environment safe. But related to the assigned seats, and as we consider the challenges of operating our buses at reduced capacity, we are going to implement a one-stop policy this year. It's already kind of consistent with our existing board policy, but we're gonna manage that differently than we have in the past. We have often allowed families to schedule different pickup and drop-off locations throughout the week, depending on where the student was going to be headed on any given day or picked up from. And we simply, under the circumstances, are not going to be able to manage that. So we're going to ask each family to identify one pickup location and one drop-off location that we will use daily for that student. And if the family needs the student to end up somewhere different than that, then they're going to have to help us by getting the student to or from wherever else it is that they need to go. So that is a significant change. Again, we are normally able to provide families more assistance with their transportation needs than that, but we just simply cannot manage all of the circumstances and the contact tracing and the limited capacity of our buses, and continue to offer that flexibility. Related to that, we also have circumstances where one student goes home with another student, maybe for a birthday party or a sleepover or something, and we're not going to be able to accommodate that either. Since we are going to assign seats on the buses, if Billy wants to go home with Johnny for a birthday party, the parents are going to have to work that out and make that work. We're not going to be able to send Billy home on Johnny's bus to make that work.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sewell. I'm going to go to Mr. Sprout now, talk about technology. I know that he's been working hard to help on the virtual learning side to make sure that there's a two-way interaction and some of those things. So, Mr. Sprout, can you give us an update on technology and reentry plans, please?
Sure. So we are continuing to focus on ensuring that we get all the right technology to the right people. The video system that I have set up here, we are going to showcase with our virtual teachers that will be on assignment specifically at the elementary school. I saw a comment earlier about sitting behind a computer all day, and we want this to be an interactive experience. And so the camera that I'm using right now has a pan tilt zoom. There's a couple monitors to make sure that the teachers can interact with the students, screen share. We're going to do some whiteboarding because we want this to be engaging. We want to make sure that all of our students benefit, even the parents that decide, you know what, I need to stay home. And we want to make sure that as we proceed forward in both the virtual and in class, that all the students benefit. As mentioned earlier, the secondary looks a little bit different than the elementaries. And so this setup will be for the elementaries. We have already began collecting the staff's Chromebook, which will go through a process to ensure that they're ready for kindergartners once we get back in session. So we're continuing to make progress. We're reaching out with Apex and making sure everything's ready to go there. So it'll just be a continued adjustment as we move forward to the start of school.
Thank you, Mr. Sprout. We have two remaining that first in special education. Scott, do you want to give us any updates with regard to reentry plans for special education?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I'm having some technical difficulties. There really aren't any major updates to special education other than I want to reiterate that special education is individualized. And so as we approach school, whether that is in person or virtually, we can review IEP and make revisions as needed. And so I just want to encourage parents that if they have questions to reach out to teachers of record and ask for a case conference so that we can review IEPs and make those necessary revisions. Virtually, we will make sure that we're following the IEP. It will look a little bit different than it would be in person, but we will make sure that students get their services. And in person, we will do the same thing. Our goal is just to eliminate some transitions. Obviously keep our kids as safe as possible using PPE, but we will continue to implement those.
And thank you. Mm-hmm. And the last, I'm actually going to segue to our next item of superintendent's report. And that is with social emotional learning. We realize that this pandemic has caused a lot of emotional issues and stress and strain for everybody. Thankfully, the community said yes to helping support that through the referenda. And we're going to continue to focus on mental health. And so with that, we have with us our Director of Mental Health, Kimberly Sperling, and I think she has some exciting information to share with you in a presentation that will also factor into our reentry plan.
Yes, thank you for that, Dr. Clendenning. Do I need to share my presentation?
I think Mr. Sprout will Is who's controlling the meeting today? It's either Mr. Sprout or Mrs. Betts, whichever one, and they will pull it up.
Okay, well, while they are pulling it up, I would just like to say good evening, friends and staff and teachers and families and our lovely school board. And I just appreciate this opportunity to share a really awesome recommendation to bring mental health support to our students at Franklin Community Schools. So, sorry, I'm getting a text message. I apologize. And so I'd just like to get started with the presentation. I'll move right into it. Can people see it, or is it still not visible?
Not yet. They're still working on it.
They're still working on it. Well, we'll hold on for just a second.
Give me just a second. We'll be right there.
Not a problem. It's so pretty. I want everyone to see it. Okay, perfect. I think that everyone should be able to see it by now. Mr. Lamb, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Okay, wonderful.
We're good. Yep.
Okay, well, I would like to go ahead and move to the next slide. So right now, what you're seeing is just a visual of what our mental health services and supports look like. I don't mean for this picture to minimalize all of the amazing things that our school counselors have done. But the next slide, what it's really going to show is what we look to for the future. So for our 2020-21 school year, I want everybody to see a more robust visual of the mental health supports that we are going to be bringing to the school corporation. And I will be talking about some of that information tonight. So as you can see, oh, look, somebody says very cool. Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. So again, this is just a visual, and I'm going to go into more in depth of the specifics of the recommendations for tonight. So Matt, you can move to the next slide. So this, what we're going to talk about now is mental health staffing options. So what we're going to be looking at is information from adult and child in regards to a 50-50 split position versus our own social emotional learning interventionist position. And so really quickly, this is just to help define the two different types of positions. So the first position that I looked at along this mental health journey is at adult and child. So currently adult and child can offer a position where what they refer to as 50-50, meaning 50% of the time they would be serving students that are insurance eligible at the school-based level for about 20 hours per week, and they would be considered a staff with adult and child. And then the other 50% of the time, they would be providing and serving students regardless if they were receiving adult and child services or regardless if they had insurance. And then that would be about 20 hours per week. So in total, that position would be a 40-hour position. On the Franklin side, what I'm recommending today is that we move towards hiring our own. So our own social emotional learning interventionists. So they would provide mental health services and support to all FCS students. They would be considered an FCS employee, and they would serve our students regardless of insurance, and they would work about 40 hours per week. So we can move to the next slide. The next slide is really just a comparison. And so some of this is just information based. I really just wanted to focus on the three areas that have stars next to them. So the difference between adult and child, and their 50-50 positions, and an SEL interventionist, like I said before, the hours of service per week. If we went with adult and child, we would get 20 hours of service per week. If we hire our own, we get 40 hours of service per week per position. Also, there is an overhead cost that is associated with hiring individuals on the adult and child side, and there's not an overhead cost associated with hiring our own interventionist. The overhead costs kind of include things like IT support, licensure fees, clinical supervision, and other things like that. Now, the cost per position is a little bit different in regards to adult and child versus our SEL interventionists. If we were to go with an adult and child 50-50 split position, then you would see that the cost would be $43,742 per position. If we were to hire our own interventionist, that position would be $63,263. The difference is that the difference between those two positions, if we want to move to the next slide, one of the biggest things that we want to make sure that we talk about here is that the entire cost of adult and child's position is actually $87,484. FCS, if they were to become into an MOU agreement with adult and child, they would be required to pay 50% of the total cost. So that's where the $43,742 comes from. And so when you break that down, it's really saying that adult and child, the 50-50 split position, is a salary savings of 31%, but FCS would only get 50% of the services provided, versus if we were to go with our own staff, we would be getting 100% of the services provided. Some additional advantages of going with our own staff versus adult and child is that overall, we're looking at hiring. My recommendation says we're looking at hiring 3 new positions. So that would equate to an additional 120 hours of service versus 60 hours if we went with adult and child staff. This means additional mental health support for Custer Baker Intermediate, the middle school, and the high school. And so again, there's some additional advantages there that people can read through, but bottom line is going with our own staff gives us more services, which means that we can meet the needs of our students at a better rate than we can if we were to go with the adult and child route. So we can go to the next position or the next slide. So overall, what I'm recommending, and this is the cost breakdown. So I'm recommending 3 total positions, 1 at CBIS, 1 at the middle school, and 1 at the high school. And the salary breakdown you can see there. So it gives the cost per position, which is $63,000 plus. So if you multiply that by the 3 positions, that's where I came to the total of $189,789 approximately in order to hire 3 social emotional interventionists. And then just a note there is this is a salary that is based on a master's level graduate with 1 year experience. So and we can go ahead and move to the next slide. Does anybody have any questions on the board right now in regards to what I've just shared before we start on another recommendation?
Ms. Kim, are you confident we can find folks to fill these jobs?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Are you confident that we'll be able to find people to fill these jobs?
Absolutely. I've already been talking to individuals, just kind of prepping the situation to see who would be interested out there. And I definitely have several individuals that are interested in a school-based social emotional learning intervention position. Any other questions that I can answer before moving forward? Okay. So the second recommendation is a kind of a journey again with looking at 2 different areas. So I was looking at the Bowen Center, which is a mental health agency that is in Northern Indiana, and then Adult and Child, which is our current partner for our community mental health center. And this is what we refer to as a student assistance program. And then you can go to the next slide. So really what I want everybody to take away in regards to the student assistance program, think of it as it's similar to an EAP program that a lot of companies have for their employees, but this is for students. So what this would be is a way to bridge the gap, meaning that on your mental health journey, it's a very personal journey and it comes at different points in times. And we want to be able to say that we have the ability to bridge a gap, meaning it can be very overwhelming when you're trying to identify, oh my gosh, I believe that my child needs some mental health support. Where do I go? Where do I go? Who do I call? I'm not sure, what the right services are. So what this does is we would want to enter into an agreement with adult and child, and the school corporation would then pay 2 prepaid counseling sessions at 25 cents per student per counseling session per month. And so what this would give us is access to confidential mental health support. The school is not notified if the student utilizes this session. So at any point in time, student and family can sit down and say, you know what, I think the next step is to look into some mental health support. All they have to do is the student can either walk down to their school counseling office and talk to the adult and child staff that's present on site, or they would be able to place a phone call, and they would either be able to be seen that same day or the next day, and they could start to get their mental health needs addressed immediately. Adult and child can provide face-to-face, telephonic, or telehealth, which is just virtual like what we're doing now. They can provide it in those 3 different modalities, which is very helpful because students, sometimes students want to have that face-to-face. Some of them would love to sit in their bedroom with their jammies on and have a telehealth session. And so the additional information there is, parent consent is required, but this is not an insurance or pre-authorization required. The school would be removing a lot of those barriers by providing the 2 prepaid counseling sessions. And as of right now, this recommendation is just focused on offering this at the middle school and the high school level. And you can go to the next slide. Uh-oh. Well, for some reason it didn't show up. Well, there is a side-by-side comparison. So even though you can't see it, I apologize about that. But basically, it's the same information. It's just talking the difference about mode of delivery. Bowen cannot provide face-to-face or in the school setting because they have no brick and mortar buildings in Johnson County. They only have them up north. So that's really one of the big aspects of why I love working with adult and child, as they are already our current community mental health center, but they have the ability to provide the mental health support, whether it be face-to-face in the office setting or virtual or telephonically. Otherwise, the cost is the same. So as of right now, my recommendation, and you can move to the next slide. This is just a little bit of information that talks about DMHA, which is the Division of Mental Health and Addiction. They require that all mental health, community mental health centers, they have to provide their clients with a client satisfaction survey. So the next slide will show that adult and child ranked higher than the state's average across the board for providing mental health support to youth. And they also across the board beat out Bowen Center on all of those categories. So I just wanted to make sure that was another deciding factor of wanting to move with adult and child versus going with the Bowen Center. So you can move to the next slide. So again, this is my recommendation for partnering with adult and child. You can see the cost breakdown. It would be 2 prepaid sessions at 25 cents each. The number of students served, it's approximately 2,500, which that's just an average, give or take, of the middle school and the high school. And we can partner with adult and child and utilize these services, whether we purchase the package monthly, quarterly, or by calendar year. One of the most important aspects, though, is this is a calendar year cost total of $11,250, but services would still be provided during the summer at no additional cost. So that's another amazing asset that we would get as well. And so you can move to the next slide. So just to recap really quickly, my recommendation is, again, for 3 social emotional learning interventionists, 1 at CBIS, 1 at the middle school, 1 at the high school, and they would provide brief solution-focused therapy, among other things, to provide that mental health support to our students. And then also the adult and child would be to enter into an MOU agreement for a student assistance program to serve the middle school and high school students, which is approximately 2,500 students for the calendar year of $11,250. You can move to the next slide. So as right now, I thank you for your time. I would love to answer any questions that anybody may have.
I have another question. Can you scroll up one more, Matt, back to the, I just wanted my words right. So on the student assistance program one, are we just paying a flat fee no matter how many appointments are actually used?
Correct.
So is this like an office hours thing where we're paying for them to be in our building? Or are we, I'm trying to understand, if we pay this $11,000 and that could cover 2,500 kids, but only 100 kids should use it during the year. What does that look like? And is the 11,000 what gets adult and child to come into the building, or is this on their books? Are they billing it per session with the student? Does that make sense?
I think so. Let me take a stab at it, and you'll help guide me. So right now we're looking at wanting to enter into an MOU with them that would be on a monthly basis. And so, yes, if students did not utilize, it's basically saying that we're going to pay this monthly fee regardless if all the students utilize it or not. We will look at each month as we go along, and we will modify accordingly. So if we see that this is not getting utilized as much as we anticipated, then we can lessen down the number of students that we are trying to serve. And we can look at more like, okay, we have 150 spots available. And if those spots get filled, then we can look at more. So we're not trying to waste funds by saying that we're always going to have 2,500 spots available if they're never utilized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I guess in my mind, one thing I would think about is having this be a set number of sessions as opposed to a set number of students who are eligible. Because if there are kids who could benefit from 5 sessions, but they max out at 2, and then they work with the navigator and they find out either they don't have access because of the insurance they have doesn't cover it, or mom and dad aren't able to get it done, does it make more sense for our agreement to say, hey, we'll cover the 3 additional ones that you need? Or do we need this to be dictated on a per student basis?
Well, I think that's an excellent question that you bring about. And because this is brand new, and adult and child is completely on board with being flexible to figure out what this needs to look like. Mm-hmm. If we needed to extend services, we absolutely could. We could definitely look at saying, okay, with this student, they don't meet this criteria, so we really need to extend 3 to 5 more sessions. I think that we can make that happen. I definitely want to make sure that one thing that is clear is that the 2 sessions, it is helping the student and the family get through the door, and it's helping them bypass certain things, what is called open access. So open access at adult and child will require a family, so like the student and family, to actually go to the brick and mortar and, fill out some information and sit and wait for their, for their time to be called. Doing it this way, it bypasses that. It gives them the ability to seek out and get these services without having to go face-to-face inside and wait through until their name is called and whatnot. Now, the other thing that is important to mention is that when they sit down with that mental health navigator. That navigator is then absolutely going to identify next steps. Do you get additional sessions based on because you qualify for Medicaid? Do you get additional sessions because you qualify for private insurance? If for some odd reason parents don't follow through with something, we can't get certain things outlined fast enough, that's another thing that makes it amazing, that if we go through and we hire our social emotional interventionists, they can pick up some slack right now until additional things are figured out, and we work with adult and child to address whatever it is that student needs in order to meet their needs and be successful, in the school setting. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think you are so impressive. This is fantastic. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful question. I appreciate that. I mean, again, this is something that's very new. We're excited about it. The Bowen Center, has been doing this up in Northern Indiana. We're trying to bring the same thing down here. We think it's been very successful, and we really look forward to seeing how it will address our students' needs in a little bit different capacity than what we've been used to. So I appreciate the questions. Does anybody else have any questions?
Kim, the only other question, this is Dr. Clendenning. You might address the partnership that we've had with Adult and Child and them providing support in the buildings. Will that continue for 2021?
Excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely. We want to, we have enjoyed and appreciate our relationship with Adult and Child. That will absolutely continue. As of right now and for several years, they have been providing mental health support for students that have insurance eligibility. And that will definitely continue. And we expect the social emotional learning interventionists to collaborate with Adult and Child as we will continue to collaborate on the student assistance program. Any other questions that I can answer?
Kim, I would just add that we will be funding these initiatives with referendum funds. If you recall, mental health was one of 3 main objectives that we had for those funds. So this falls right in line, both the positions and the contract services, with what we committed to using the referendum funds for. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tina. That's a wonderful point. Any other comments or questions?
Kim, this is Andy. Again, great job. Thanks for pulling the details together on that. For everyone that's online, the presentation that Kim went through is attached to the agenda tonight. So for that one slide that we couldn't see, it is part of the packet, and I was able to open that up. So you can take a look at it after the session tonight.
Good. Perfect. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, Kim. Great job.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move into the third item under the superintendent reports, our financial report.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Well, as you can see, the closure of the buildings for several months has been kind to our budget. We're about 50% into the fiscal year, and we really don't have any categories that I would flag right now. In most cases, we're between 35 and 50%. So right now we look really good. Now we've got a lot of expenses coming up with transportation and getting the buildings clean and sanitized and all the expenses that go along with our re-entry plan. But we're keeping a close eye on that. We're applying for various grants where we can get as much reimbursement as possible. So I think we're on track to stay within budget this year.
Thank you for that. Any questions or comments from the board? All right. we'll move into the action items. We have one item tonight, and that is on for our journey as we continue on to make the Franklin schools a great place to work. We have the agreement for Pete the Planner. Mrs. Gross, we'll let you take that one on.
Yes, thank you. At our last meeting, we talked a little about our financial wellness program and plans. As you recall, this is an employer of choice initiative. We would like to enter into an agreement with Pete the Planner, and this will provide online resources for all 740 of our employees in the areas of financial wellness. They'll have access to a phone line. They'll have access to online resources with various topics like budget management, how to save for college, how to buy your first house, those kind of things. One slight change, we had planned to kick this program off on August the 3rd in our Welcome Back programming. But since we've had to switch gears and make that an outside event, I think we may delay this kickoff and programming until January when things calm down a little bit and we can roll it out in a good way and really get the employees engaged around financial wellness. So I'm requesting approval to move ahead with the contract with the caveat that we may delay for a few minutes for the kickoff.
Hey, Tina, it's Brian. A quick question. I skimmed it quickly, so it's probably in there, but what's the duration of the contract? Is it just for 1 year?
Just for 1 year. And they will provide data on participation rates so we can make a good informed decision about whether or not to commit for another year.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right, do I have a motion?
I'll move for approval. This is
Thank you,
Christine.
Thank you. All right, Brian, how do you vote?
Yes.
Is that Brian or Ryan? See, I get confused.
I don't ever know when I can talk.
So Brian, we'll go with you then.
All right. Yes.
Thank you. Becky?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So Tina, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving to our next item, discussion item is the first read on the policies for the COVID-19 updates.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Over the past several weeks, we've met Mr. Wagner as well as Dr. Worland to review the COVID-19 policies that are coming from both federal and state level. And tonight you're seeing those, for example, numbers 0164 through 0167.3 deal with the function of the board and how we're doing this virtual setting. And the executive order the governor issued back in March for us to do this. Our agency that we use, Neola, is catching up and they're getting this policy to us. I believe that the executive order is due to expire in August the 4th, I believe is the date. So we'll look to see what happens there. But right now, this would be our last virtual meeting. But these policies, if executive order continues, would allow us to continue to meet virtually and vote and to continue to hold the business of school during this pandemic time. The other policies, 8415, 8416, and 8450, provide the superintendent or designee with authority to make actions as needed with regard to what's happening inside of the pandemic. And at this time, we would ask that the board just review these, and then we'll come back and adopt them in our August meeting. If you recall, we did a resolution to do this basically the exact same thing back in April. This is now just moving those into board policy in the event that we need to move forward. And that's why, for example, that our policy on reentry plan was not adopted by the board, it was issued as information and superintendent's report so that we could act in fast real time as opposed to having the board have to come back and have a special meeting. And then we'll continue to bring it back to the board for your yes and authority and along those ways. So that's what this was intended to do during this pandemic time. So those policies are in their first reading.
All right, thank you for that. So let's move into the board administrative comments. I'll open up for the board members. Any comments to add to that?
I just would say thank you to everyone who's shared questions tonight. I think they've been really good, and they've been a reason for us to think about a lot of things. And so please keep those coming. We know that, you know, there's 5,000 kids in this district, and each one of those kids is somebody's whole entire world. And so we are doing everything we can to keep the loves of your life safe. And if there are things we can do to improve, if there's questions you have that are unanswered, please reach out, because we're all in this together. And you know, these are unprecedented times, and we're all doing the best we can. But let us know if we can do more, we can do better, we can be clearer in our guidance, because this stuff is really important.
Thank you for that, Ryan. Any other comments from the board? David, I'll share with you any.
Yes, we have a couple of comments. One, I want to let the board know we did send out an internal survey to both certified and classified staff. And we asked them 2 questions. On a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling coming back to the building? In addition, we've asked them to list their top 3 concerns. And we're going to get that information back this Friday, and we'll share that both with the board, but it really is designed to help us make sure we have all the questions answered. Additionally, I want to thank FCTA and President Harris and his team. They have walked alongside us in this journey. They're outstanding teachers, outstanding school leaders, and I feel very fortunate to have this group of union leadership work with us during this time. It is definitely a stressful time. It's definitely a time where we need all the collective power we can to make the very best decision. And FCTA has shown that and continue to work with us. We are meeting with them. We're actually now meeting once a week, and then a continued conversation. We're meeting on Thursdays to make sure we are gathered together. And then we're going to have one larger meeting at the end of this month with the entire FCTA. But I just want to let the board know about that as well. And then just a couple of other things to know. Dr. Warland's town hall meeting about at-home learning, please come into that and we'll share information with you. And I would echo Ryan's thoughts. Thank you, parents. Thank you for trusting us. It is an unprecedented time, and we'll continue to evaluate and make decisions that will keep everybody safe, our staff, your students, but parents, you make the best decision for your family. That's why we're meeting and having these conversations. And if you've got a great idea, we want to hear it. Email us, share it. The entire board and administration, teachers, we're all working together to make sure that our kids continue to have their number one guiding principle met, and that's individual student growth.
And Dr. Clendenning, I posted those dates and times and the meeting links in the chat.
Thank you, Dr. Warland.
All right, thank you. So let's move to the next agenda item, our calendar of events.
Yes, tomorrow night at 6, I'm going to host a coffee, virtual coffee. We're going to talk about all things Franklin Schools, not just COVID-19 in Franklin Schools, but please come and join that. Also this Saturday at 9, we are graduating the class of 2020. It will be on the football field. We're looking forward to that. If it were to rain at 9 o'clock, we're going to look to do it in the evening. And if it would rain again, we're going to do it on Sunday. So one of those 3 times, we're going to get this class graduated. And I wanted to thank Mr. Ahouse and his team for providing all the behind the support structures to make this happen. We are streaming this live in 3 different mediums to make sure that the class of 2020 and their parents and people far and away get a chance to see that. So that's at 9 a.m. We're also having another coffee with the superintendent on the 27th, and that's in the morning, and that'll be right before we start school as we head to stop. New teacher orientation is coming on the 29th and 30th, and that is going to be in person at the middle school as we bring new people in. Back to school nights are August the 3rd for most of our buildings. They will all be outside. They'll be in person. I will tell you the middle school is looking at doing something different this year just because of having 800 families come to that one campus at one time. So Principal Holman is continuing to look at the best way to do that. But the elementaries are going to be on the 3rd and looking at outside opportunities and meet your parents. And I know parents have a lot of questions like, when are we going to find out the class list? It's going to be that Friday. They'll be available in Power School right before we start school on that. And then we do have right now the first day scheduled for August the 5th. And we're excited. We're looking forward to it. We're hopefully that the numbers will continue to go down for the virus and everything that allow us to have ease of mind for everybody. But I just want to thank everyone and for the admin and the teachers putting all the efforts in the reentry plans. We're going to be ready to go whatever day it is that we get to go back. And if it's not that day, we'll be ready to teach and learn when we need to.
Very good. With that, we'll move to the next item on the agenda is our public comments. So I'll open it up to anyone online. If you have comments related to the agenda tonight or any topic of concern, we'll limit your time to 2 minutes. But if you would please get onto the chat, let Mrs. Betts know that you'd like to talk, and then we'll go in order there.
And I apologize. I took down the questions, but Brooke and Jeff did a great job of answering a lot of those questions during the meeting. So if your question didn't get answered and you don't mind copying and pasting it, please do so. I just don't want to duplicate the answers that have already been answered. And Mackenzie did ask, Dr. Worland talked about the Google Meet for more information. So yes, we will absolutely send that out in an email to parents so that they can save that.
And Mrs. Betts, you might remind everybody this is being recorded, and the questions that come up on the chat are also archived. So we have those as well.
Great. So we would have access to those links, but we'll still send them out. Absolutely. Mr. Sewell, I think you and Dr. Clendenning might be able to take this. Regarding the contact tracing, Amanda Ott wants to know, what is the duration between the test of a suspected infection and subsequent testing of those exposed?
That is a good question. I know Dr. Mormon is right now stressing to the authority, we need better testing and quicker testing turnaround. So he doesn't have a specific, I will tell you right now, it's, you got to still get an appointment. You got to get in there, and that could be some time, and it's up to 5 days right now. And so that time of isolation is actually getting close to that 14-day window, no matter what. Dr. Mormon realizes that it needs to be much quicker when the start of school comes, especially for all of us in Johnson County, and he is working on that. So Amanda, we'll get back with you when as that timeline gets closer, and we're trying to narrow it in. And I agree that's a huge issue, and Dr. Mormon's aware of that issue as well.
And I would just add to that just reminds us of the importance of folks staying home if they're not feeling well as we work through the challenges together.
And Brooke, I also had a question from a parent previously. What if they are doing, that on-site learning in a secondary world and has to quarantine? Will they receive any kind of e-learning or instruction at home during that time that they must be quarantined?
Excellent question.
Yep, that's a great question. And for students who are absent, so just like students in our current building, if you're absent, we will handle absences through the classroom teachers just like we currently do. The difference may be if you are at home for, let's say, a week or 2 weeks, we are with our faculty, students can't get 2 weeks behind, a week behind. So some of them will be we will be using Google Classroom across the district regardless, but some of them will be providing assignments or PowerPoints or videos or some sort of information so that we can maintain instruction during that time students are out. But it will be the responsibility of the classroom teachers so that we're not shifting students back and forth between on-site and virtual learning.
Great. And a couple of parents brought up any comments or thoughts about the announcement today about Washington Township. I don't think we heard any announcement today about them going to 100% virtual learning, at least for the fall. Does the board or admin have any comments on that or any discussion points for that?
My first comment, Mrs. Beth was kidding. Yes, we've heard that
Sorry.
about MSD Washington. Mr. Lamb, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think first, I think their situation conditions are different than what we have here in Johnson County, here at Franklin Schools. And so they're making the decisions that's right for them. I think that as we've talked here this evening, our conditions are ever changing. And so our plans are ever changing. Right now, we still feel that the reentry plan is the best for our schools, our students. If the data, if Johnson County spikes up, if the data changes, then we're going to have to sit down and rethink those plans. And we're working closely. Dr. Clendening is working closely with the board. He's, as you've heard this evening, he's got his team working all those questions, all those conditions. So right now, I don't have a specific answer that I can give you, just to say that we're still monitoring that and we're moving forward with the plans that we have today.
And Mr. Lamb, I would just say thank you, and I'd agree. We are continuing to look at all bits of information. Our reentry plan was intended to give parents that best choice for their family, and we want that to continue. And as we get new information, and as we gather that, we will get with the board again, and we'll continue to make the decision that's best for Franklin Schools and best for our safety of students and teachers and staff and the community.
This is Brian. I think it's one thing you touched on it, Dr. Clendening, about a choice. And I think it's important that we reiterate that to the community, that if they are uncomfortable with our reentry plan, that they have another option. At the end of the day, they are the decision maker of their child. So if they're uncomfortable, I can understand that, because we can't promise everything. But they certainly have another option, which would be to do online learning. I just want to make sure parents understand that if they're uncomfortable with what we're doing, we have other options.
All right. So one last opportunity. Any comments from the public that's joined on this evening?
I don't have any showing up in the chats.
All right. Well, with that, then we will adjourn the meeting this evening, and thanks everyone for your time. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.